Yes, how are you?
Last session was so exciting. It was very, very nice.
Oh, good.
I was eagerly waiting for today.
I'm
So
flattered.
let me take a little kind of an informal survey here. Can you just raise your hand if you are familiar with Tarot, so that we know?
I'm familiar. Hi, Josh. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Tim. Hi, Nicole.
Okay.
Okay. So my assumption is that maybe about half of us have had experience with it. So that'll help me steer the conversation a little bit.
Yep, and we're online now, Tim, so go ahead.
Okay, good enough.
Yep.
Well, thanks everybody for popping in on this. I've been looking forward to hearing Melissa talk about the Tarot and what she's done with it. And I have to confess, I'm one of those newbies who, I've heard about Tarot my whole life. And my sister uses those cards. And of course, I'm totally taken with the principle, but I've never had any experience with it. And so Melissa, reading your book was really the first time that I was able to dive in and see what it's about.
Wow.
And to me, it's absolutely fascinating, but it's, it's kind of parallel to all these other ways we have of digging into the material in the unconscious and trying to form these little threads between our outside lives and our inside lives. And so I'm just really eager to hear what you have to say. So I'm mostly going to be on the stupid end of asking questions, but
that's great. The stupid end is like, I'm all for the stupid end of asking questions. I think, that's the Princess of Wands. I always feel like that's always, the person who's not afraid to say, well, the emperor's not wearing any clothes. Why is he naked?
We need more of those guys right now.
Right, but that's good. Like being afraid to ask questions means you don't learn anything.
But I do want to encourage other people to ask questions as we go along. And I don't know, do you have a set presentation, or do you want us to ask questions as you go along, or what?
I don't have a set presentation, and I'm totally fine with people asking questions as it goes along. That makes it a more active conversation, and makes it so that what I have, I can probably talk about the Tarot forever. As I said, I've had them for like over 50, I've had Tarot cards for over 50 years now. So, so this is something that there's a lot of different ways to approach how to talk about it. And I'd like it to be the way that resonates most with the people who are here.
Oh,
I'd just like to mention before we get too far along that I did have a formal official reading from Melissa 16 days ago. And what I can tell you is it was profound. And that's me saying it. So I have no doubt about Melissa's ability as a psychic. So anyway, without further ado, let's introduce Melissa Townsend. And she's going to talk to us about the Tarot generally and about the 2 decks that she has personally painted. So go for it.
So I'll get started talking, and then if people have questions, and Skip, if you see people raise a hand or something where they have questions, just interrupt and we'll take it from there.
Well, as long as we don't have any untoward interruptions, everybody will be able to unmute themselves and speak. And if we have something untoward happen, then I'll shut all that down.
And you'll all be muted again.
Yeah, we'll all be in sign languages. But until that time, you can just unmute and come online. Please do keep your mic muted when you're not speaking, though, so we don't get extra.
So
are you monitoring the YouTube chat?
Skip? Oh. Are you monitoring the YouTube chat? Okay.
You are, okay.
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'll monitor the Zoom chat. If anybody wants to ask a question, just go ahead and
Good
put it in the
idea.
chat.
You do the Zoom chat, I'll do the YouTube chat.
Okay.
All right,
So I'll start
Melissa.
off and say a little bit about myself and the tarot, and I'll show some of the images of my cards and the other cards. I have cards around me that I can hold up, and I have stuff on the screen that I can screen share with. But as I was telling people beforehand, I've had tarot cards since I was like 8 or 9. I saw the pictures in a book that I got that was one of the books that I ordered at school, and called Astrology and Other Occult Games. And I saw pictures of the Rider-Waite deck, and told my mother that I wanted a deck of tarot cards. And much to my surprise, she actually gave me a deck of tarot cards a few months later for Christmas. But it was the very difficult to read IJJ Swiss deck that doesn't have pictures for the pip cards or the minor arcana. And I struggled with that for a while, and I did read cards at least once a year for my family, if not more. And then in my teens and 20s, early 20s, I started getting more into the tarot, and also honestly other divination methods. Like the I Ching was a huge teacher of mine for many years. And for me, I would say divination methods it was very much a spiritual practice for me. Beforehand, Tim, you were mentioning something about, these different ways that we find of engaging in conversations between the inner and the outer. And really these methods, all these divination methods, that's really the point, to find a way to communicate with that part inside of ourselves that knows something that our rational mind isn't taking in, or doesn't know, or hasn't been able to formulate. And I think especially when you're young, which I was, and when you're trying to find your way in the world, finding a way to connect to meaning and to is very important. So the I Ching is a whole philosophical system that's very much tied in with all of Chinese language and culture and mythology and everything. But I'm a Western, and it had a huge impact on me, and I love the whole philosophical underpinning of that. But like I'm an American, and the tarot is particularly helpful, I think, for Westerners, because the images on it relate to Western spirituality and Western iconography. When you travel in Italy, you see images of justice in churches. You see these images all over the place, and they relate to the mythology that is the underpinning of our society and of our culture. So the tarot and the iconic images that it embodies, that the major arcana in particular show, is particularly useful, I think, in term when you're young and at any age, but in terms of trying to kind of locate yourself and locate how the inner and outer are relating, how you're relating to the world, to find a structure in which to try to position what you know and don't know about what's happening with you inside and outside. So playing with and working with the tarot was a big part of my 20s, I would say. And then and also as an artist, I've always loved games and cards and that sort of thing. So I love the tarot for that as well. As an artist, I always also really wanted to make my own, it seemed like I should make my own tarot deck. I did actually do paintings at a certain point that were going to be a deck, but like I was a painter, I like worked so hard over each one. At a certain point, I traveled with a boyfriend at the time to Italy, and in Italy, like in every you go to the the cigarette shops on every corner, the tobacco stores. There's tarot decks in there. There's tarot decks that were designed by the person down the street. There's so many different, and I realized that I was making it too difficult, that I should just just do it. At the time I was working in a friend's restaurant, El Teddy's. It was a high-end Mexican restaurant in Tribeca in Manhattan. And I drew the first full tarot deck on the back of the business cards for that deck. And I drew it, the point was to draw it like quickly and to just really get something expressed quickly. So that's the first more colorful deck. And then the other deck that I say looks like somebody who went to art school did it is I took more time doing. But I spent a lot of at a certain point I went through the whole process of working with the tarot and how I then how I became a reader, and how I started doing it for a living. That's which I was already doing by the time I drew my first tarot deck. That's a separate story. But okay, so does anybody have any questions, or what would you like to hear more about? I can show some images of the cards and talk more about.
Before we go any further, can you just explain what the major and minor arcana are?
Sure. Yeah.
Cards? So
the major arcana, and let me do some screen sharing here. I've got to get my cursor working. So the tarot, the major arcana are the 22 major cards, 22 cards of there are 22. I'm trying to get a picture first. Let's see if I can just get my desktop, and then I can find the image that has them all. So let's get this one. So you can all see that strength card, is that correct? And I'm scrolling through the cards, is that correct? Okay. So yep. The 22 major cards they go from the Fool, which is 0, through to the World, and there's many different ways. There's different ways to understand them, but the one that I think is they show the major internal circumstances of your life. They show the big events. I have a series of videos on YouTube called The Hero or the Fool's Journey, which goes through each of them, the cards. One can see the Fool's progress through the tarot from, and it also relates, it has other relationships as well. So from, the beginning to first learning to manipulate or manage or talk or walk or use your hands, to more of a sense of vision, a more the more understanding. These are to the mother. Now, Skip and I were talking about, should the Empress be first or should the Fool be first? But this is the traditional structure of the tarot, at least. To the archetypes, they're archetypes. So we have the High Priestess and the Empress, the two female archetypes, the sort of the mother and the wisdom goddess, sort of Athena and Hera. And then we have the two male archetypes, the Emperor, the father, and the teacher or society, the Hierophant. And then, so these are the archetypes that like the Fool first meets. And then you find the other, the lovers, the first occurrence of seeing yourself in the other. And then there's a number of ones that deal with that duality. The lovers, the Chariot, which is another one about managing life and managing the duality and making it go in a single direction. Strength, and the Hermit. And then we have the Wheel of Fortune. And the middle card of the tarot, people argue about whether this card is in the middle, or whether this one in strength, justice, which is kind of like that balanced middle point. So if you think of the Fool as like embarking on a journey, then these are the stages that they go through. And then we start getting to the difficulties after, for the Hanged Man, death, the inevitable, the inevitable look into the void or difficulties, temperance, the devil, the tower, the star, the moon, the sun, the angel. This is sometimes called judgment or the last judgment, and then the world. The whole idea being that this is a path. This is the path of of knowledge or of understanding it's a wisdom path, really. And then when you get that knowledge or understanding with the judgment, when you finally understand what it is you're supposed to understand about the journey that you've been on, then the whole point is to bring it back into the world and make it solid. So the major arcana cards talk about they give a structure for what you're experiencing in a big picture, on a sort of a iconic level. The minor arcana cards are the suits, which are wands. They're wands. This is the Seven of Wands. Let's see if I can find an image of. In any case, they represent the elements. So we have fire represented by the wands, and then we have water represented by the cups, and we have the swords representing air. There's the Princess of Swords right there. And then we have the earth element, which is coins. So they're the court cards that show the people in the different people, different parts of yourself, and different people in your world that you would experience. And then the minor arcana cards go from the aces to 10, and they show event. In terms of doing readings, they would tend to show more the events, the things that happen, the circumstances. So the major arcana cards show the large psychological, emotional, spiritual stage that you're at, and the minor arcana cards show more specifically what's happening. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah, and did you say the pip cards are the suits?
The pip cards are the suit. So that would relate to, in the like when playing cards, that would relate to like the suits of diamonds, hearts, spades, and clubs.
And there are 4 of them.
There's 4 of them, right?
Okay.
So,
So,
go ahead.
can I ask you, what did you call those 4 cards just then? The pip cards,
Pip
did you
cards.
say?
So that's pip, P-I-P.
Right. Yeah,
So
right.
minor arcana cards are also sometimes called the pip cards.
Oh, okay, that's the minor. Okay, thank you.
Right. So when you do a reading, for example, with somebody, it does make a difference what kinds of cards show up. So this gets to another point. Skip was asked in the 2 decks that I designed, as you might see, I'll share the screen again. So in this, this one's that I call the El Teddy's deck, or the El Ted's Tarot. You can see that there's pictures on each of the cards, pictures of something happening, somewhat similar to like the Rider-Waite deck. This is the Rider-Waite deck, and you can see actually this is very similar. Here's my 7 of Wands, and here's the 7 of Wands in the Rider-Waite deck. So you can look at that picture and it gives you some idea of the particular event that you're talking about. What kind of thing is this person doing? You know, they're using the wand energy, that kind of like internal fire in a manifested form, to either lead or hold off or protect themselves against potential, you know, something else coming at them from the outside. This is from my other deck, and there's nothing that tells you what it means. You kind of have to know what it means yourself, or just be open to what comes up for you from it. So the reason that I did it is because after this kind of image was very helpful in terms of learning the tarot. But once I had done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of readings, like there were so many different things that I knew that each of the cards could mean, that I actually then started to like the IJJ Swiss deck, this one, or this is Aleister Crowley's deck, which it's helped by saying valor, or this is Tarot of the Spirit, which it calls it courage. But I liked being able to see the difference between, I liked having like the major cards really show up and look major, and the minor cards, the minor arcana, not. Whoops, there we go. We have like Fuji screen. I'll stop sharing. There we go. So, so when I do a reading with this deck, right? I guess you can really see the major cards really show up as opposed to the minor cards. But so when you do a reading, if there's a lot of major cards, it shows a time in somebody's life when there's a lot going on the inside. And if you do a reading in which there are a lot of, where there's no major cards that show up, I mean, it shows that whatever they're asking about is, it shows a certain, it can mean different things, but it certainly is focusing on just the events and not what's happening underneath the picture of it, the surface of it. So at this point, and from earlier on, I prefer to see that big picture layout show up in a reading right away.
So for those of us who are new to this, would it be easier to learn from one deck or to compare?
Yes, I would say from my experience of learning with a deck that's very difficult to learn with, I would say there is absolutely no question, but that it is much easier to learn with a deck like the Rider-Waite, or you know, and there's many decks that are related to the Rider-Waite deck. Like my El Teddy's deck, which has images, you know, of stuff happening, that it's much easier to get a sense for what could be going on there. At the same time, I would say that there's certainly something that's definitely worth it to also learn, you know, the aspects of like what the coins are always about the earth element. So they're about something physical. They can be about money, they can be about a home, they can be about work, but they're about the physical manifestation of things. And each of the numbers has a meaning too. And rather than go through all of it, I mean, I would say I actually have a lot of really good videos on YouTube about the tarot. There's the series on the Fool's Journey, which is great, and which makes the connections between the cards and not just Western mythology, but also like for example, the Chariot has real resonance with the Gita, with the Bhagavad Gita, and the story of Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna, and what it means to manage the body through life in a successful way, how we deal with the battle of life. There's many profound and important correlations between each of the cards and Western mythology and any mythological tradition that you want to look at. And I also have videos on the minor arcana too, where I talk about like what the different elements mean and how you can use knowing what the elements mean. Like, so for example, the wands are fire. the fire energy kind of doesn't, like the earth energy likes to go from ace to 10, like the 10 of earth, good thing, you know, you get like that earth solid, you got the full thing. It's that means you manifested what you wanted. The wands, which are that's kind of fire energy, they don't really like getting, they really like the beginning. And if you think of astrology too, like Aries, for example, which is the first fire sign, it likes to get things started. It's not much of a finisher, generally speaking. So knowing something about the although starting with a deck that has pictures will help you understand the meanings, the more you get into it, the more you will also want to know more of why it means that. And you'll start getting to things like the Kabbalah or the Kabbalah. And I actually learned astrology because my work with the Tarot sort of required it. I grew up in an artistic and intellectual family. I mean, I 100% knew that astrology was bullshit. I mean, I absolutely knew that. How could it not be? Of course it was. But I had to know what it meant because astrology is the oldest Western esoteric art. So everything relates to it. Like different tarot cards have astrological relationships. So I thought, well, what's the fastest way I can learn this without wasting too much time or money? And I thought, well, you know, I got a big family. I'll get everybody. My mom knows everybody's birth times. I'll get it all. I'll get the charts made, and I'll get some books, and I'll teach it to myself. How hard can it be? And I was, when I looked at my chart and then at my siblings' chart, I was blown away. It described things about myself that I knew but couldn't put into words. And it described my brothers and my sisters and things that my sister and things about our relationships to each other and our different experience of our parents. The same person, each of us had the same mother and the same father, but the ways in which our experience of them were the same and similar, like it was all there. So yeah, but I learned that because my work with the Tarot sort of required it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Melissa, now with that last sentence, you've made me think of two questions, but I'll ask my first question first. You mentioned that when during a read, somebody mainly picks up minor cards or the more smaller imaged cards, that's because probably nothing's going on particularly importantly in their lives.
No, that's not what I meant. I'm sorry if that's what it sounded like. No, it can mean a lot of different things. But let's say you're doing a reading about it's about something, you know, or if it's the first reading, when a lot of minor cards show up in a reading, most of the time what it means is that they are focused on the events that are happening in their life and that they are failing to see the big picture or not seeing the big picture or getting too distracted by the things that are happening rather than seeing the bigger picture. So that sounds judgmental. It's not necessarily always judgmental. Sometimes it means that the particular circumstance that they're talking about is a lot of noise without necessarily a lot of meaning. But it's noise that might have to be dealt with nonetheless.
Okay, thank you. My second question, which is just about what you just said about your siblings. You mentioned making them a chart. Now, what's a chart?
Oh, an astrological chart. So the astrological, like I was saying that I learned astrology because I needed to know what, like when they said that the Hierophant, let's see if I have a picture of it here. I can show it. I know where I have it. The Hierophant is is in my black and white deck. It is this card. Let's see. It's the teacher, the society, the schools, social institutions. It's the second of the male archetypes, the Pope, sometimes it's called. So this card is often said to be ruled by Taurus. I had to know what that meant. That didn't really mean anything to me. And so that's why I learned astrology, why I had to learn astrology. And the way I decided to learn astrology was I had the dates of my siblings' birth. I got the times from my mother. And then at the time I had I didn't do it myself. I had a computer. It was I didn't have it. I don't think it wasn't at that time there weren't personal computers. I had some service do up the chart, the mathematics of the chart astrologically to plot them on a circle. I can bring up what that looks like. I'll stop sharing first. And that's an astrological chart.
Thank you.
It shows the position of the planets from the point in space and time when someone was born. It maps them out on a circular
Graph.
Yeah. So I got the charts for each of my siblings. I got that plotted out, and then I started teaching myself what that meant.
Thank you.
Okay. What what are people interested in hearing about?
Well, I think people would be interested in understanding how or why it works.
How or why the tarot works?
Yes.
Okay. So divination methods work roughly in two different ways. The something like astrology or palmistry work on the notion that character is fate. So they are both methods that talk to you about your character, who you are, what are the forces that define you, and that define that define the game of the hand that you're constant. We all find ourselves in the same kinds of circumstances again and again in our life. Astrology or palmistry talk about the kind of our characteristic strengths and weaknesses, and the characteristic kinds of issues that we find ourselves going up again and again against. It's kind of like we're playing we're playing the same hand in different card games, and like, how do we keep playing it? How do we play it this time? Like, who are the different people that we're playing with, or what are the different cards that somebody else plays? Astrology or palmistry they kind of talk to you about your life and what's going to happen in that way. On a deeper level, astrology and palmistry work on the same way that the tarot does, which is that everything is connected. So I used to tell people when I started doing readings professionally, I had been bartending and waiting tables in New York. I was an artist, being in bartending and waiting tables for a living. And then I stopped at a certain point. I felt that there was something really important that I had to do. And I had gone through like a really powerful and at first traumatic, and then a sort of epiphany in my life. And so I had some money saved, and one of my brothers lent me money, and I did a group of paintings. And also that was the time when I taught myself astrology and went even deeper in the tarot. And then as I was starting to get to a point with the money where I thought, I'm going to have to start doing something, since I'm not making money selling paintings. And the thing that I thought, well, what can I do? And I thought, well, my ex-boyfriend owned had a high-end restaurant who lived across the hall from me in Manhattan, a high-end restaurant. And I thought, well, I'll see if he'll let me do tarot cards and palm readings in his restaurant. I didn't know how to read palms. It was another one of those, how difficult can it be? And there's a lot of things in my life that I've learned are difficult because I started doing them with the phrase, how difficult can it be? So I started, and I also felt like I had to start reading for more people. I had been working with the tarot a lot. In any event, I used to tell people, if I knew how to read the placement of silverware on a table, I could, or glassware, something. I could tell you something about yourself here, but I don't. The tarot is a structured, it's a structured system that, and the idea being that everything is connected. So the cards that you pick or that come up for you are not chance. And Jung was, I mean, this was his whole thing. And he spent a huge amount of time with the I Ching, which is what I mentioned was also like a huge and important teacher for me. The idea being that what comes up for you is not chance. It is expressing something. It is, you are drawn to, you know, the card or the coins fall in the order that that relates to something profound, something about yourself that is not conscious necessarily, that is subconscious, or is a way of the spirit or the soul or some other part of you that is not the rational part of communicating with you. And that's really what we're all looking for, that kind of union, that connection, the communication between the rational and the and what lies beneath the surface. So the tarot, that's how the tarot works.
So
and it's
Jen
a
Claire,
structured system. Go ahead.
Jen Claire just added a question. Is there a difference when you draw the card if it comes up upside down than right side up?
Yes, yes, there is. However, when you're learning the cards, it can be more helpful not to necessarily worry too much about that. But what I would say is that in a general sense, when the card comes upright, its energy is being easily expressed. When the card comes up reversed, its energy is somehow not so easily expressed or blocked, or it can be that that energy is leaving, or that that energy is trying to get started. More often it means that that energy is trying to express itself, or is kind of done expressing itself and needs to move on to something else. But there's some sort of issue with that energy's clear expression. So if it's a negative card, often it's somewhat better if it comes up reversed. And if it's a positive card, it's usually somewhat not so good if it comes up reversed. But it's always most important. It's always really important to let what comes up for you as you look at the cards, to let that come up for you as well.
Melissa, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Joss from Hawaii.
Hi, Joss.
Hi. This is excellent. This is fascinating. I'm new to all this, although I've had a reading done by a tarot reader. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes, again, for the general audience who are just like me, and we come across lots of, you know, card readers. How do we determine which is a good card reader, you know, when there's so many to pick? And what makes a good card reader?
Oh, wow. That's a really tough question. Okay, let's see. So, wow, what makes a good card reader? So what makes a good experience with someone reading your cards or doing any kind of reading with you has to do with the quality of it has to do with the quality of communication and connection, and their ability to do both, to connect to you, to communicate with you, and to put themselves to some degree in your place and speak to what's happening with you. So I do think, I mean, you can have a really good card reading with your best friend who's just learning how to read the cards. You can. That can happen. And also, So Skip mentioned, so I have there's the booklet that comes with both of my decks. I have to tell you, like, I think that booklet is great. I wrote it like in the 90s, and I look back at it, I'm like, wow, I really knew my stuff. Who knew? But it's very focused also on like learning the cards. Like if you pick a card a day to learn the cards, this is a really good way to learn the cards. You pick a card, you look at it, you let what come up for you. And then at the end of the day, you also think about the card that you picked and what happened during the day that that card was telling you about. It's a great way to learn the cards because you get personal, you read what's been said about it. And you also have like your own personal relationship with the card and with what it means in your life. What happened that was, the Ace of Wands or something like that. But like I have friends who have done readings for themselves who've never learned the meanings of the cards, who just look up the meanings in my book, in a book. And like that can be really, really helpful. So, but now on the other hand, and I do also know people who've like walked into like the street side psychics or gypsies or whatever and have had good readings as well. The problem with the street side psychics or gypsies is not so much the reading that you'll get, but the fact that like partway through it, they'll tell you that there's, that people are plotting against you and that for a candle that costs $200, they can light that candle and get rid of, the bad energy that somebody is like trying to put on you. The problem is not that they're necessarily a bad reader or that they won't tell, or that they have no skill or that they won't tell you anything important. The problem is more the other stuff that comes with it. So it's possible, it's hard to know. I think sometimes when you just feel that you should do something with someone, get a reading, that's often a good thing to follow. There's often something in you telling. I mean, otherwise.
Well, lighting the candle can be a good thing too.
It can be. You have to be kind of careful with, there's a tendency with, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna disparage any.
Yeah.
Melissa, there seems in part of the communication, there seems to necessitate a relationship going on between the reader and the one being read. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that there's a relationship. It's a relationship.
Which is,
so, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention this works really well into this question from Manish, who says, is there a difference when the reading is done using an online deck or an app versus using physical cards? And I would think that's exactly the point, that an online deck would be totally random, and a deck that you have with a person involves that relationship.
Right. So with online, so I haven't done a reading with an online deck. I have never done a reading with a full reading with an online deck. Back in the early days of the internet, I went to some of the websites where you pick a card. And I would say that, like, in terms of doing something for yourself, doing something where you pick a card online is chance, just the way picking your own card is chance. So there's nothing wrong with that. Doing a full, it's a different, when you decide, like, so to some extent, the answer to your question earlier, Josh, also is a little bit like, well, what are you paying for it? I mean, like, if this is a time in your life when you really want some guidance or advice, going to someone who has a reader, it can be anyone who can help you, in all honesty. There's no one magic thing that will help you, that tells you the answer that this will always work. But the ability of the reader to set aside their own agenda or their own stuff, and to both be in your place and to be outside of your place, and to be able to tell you, to be able to position you in the landscape of your life. It's a different, to get a reading from someone, and is the ability, what you really want is somebody who can give you a metaphysical map of where you are and tell you something about how you can go through it, how you can go through it and how you can't go through it, what you can avoid and what you can't avoid, and what the best way to deal with the swamp ahead of you is. Whether you just wait for it to dry up or you just trudge on through it, or is there a way around it, you know? Or is there a horse coming, you know, that kind of thing.
So I have a suggestion, Melissa. My suggestion is that we do a reading, except I'm not going to ask you as a professional reader to do a reading per se, but my idea is I've got a new tarot deck here, a mini tarot deck. It's not one of yours because I wanted to save yours until tonight. But I like to do readings for the current situation. And I think all of us would like to know what the future is for our country, for example. And so—
not to put too much pressure on it.
Yeah, so I've got a deck here that was brand new. It's called the Secret Tarot. I haven't even carefully looked at all the cards, so I may have to check what they are, but I could do a reading here little bit by little bit, and you can amplify it. How would that be okay? Would you be willing to do that?
Sure.
I mean, if I'm going badly astray, you could amplify it. And just to do a demonstration so people can see what a tarot reading looks like using the Celtic cross.
Okay, yeah.
It won't be for any individual here. It'll be just a generic reading for the next 6 months in our country, let's say.
Skip, can you do it with your camera phone on?
Yes, that's what I had in mind.
Oh, okay.
So is that okay with you, Melissa? I mean, this is your session, so.
I'm sure I'm fine with whatever is of most interest to people. I would say that generally speaking, doing a reading about the next 6 months in our country is a little bit more fraught than doing a reading on any given person's personal life. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it may be fraught. I acknowledge that, and I'll try to be as middle of the road as I can be, and we'll all try to be middle of the road. Okay. And I have no idea how it's going to come out because I've just been shuffling the cards, but I have get rid of the virtual black. Okay.
And while you're laying that out, Skip, I'll read a comment from Jan Clare, who says, in the Jungian sense, what the seeker or person sees in the card, much like the analysand sees her dream more intimately than the analyst, and that informs the meaning. I have a deck and I pull cards. I have to really look at them and project, she says.
I think that what she says is correct, that you get more out of any given reading. And this, I would say, is also like, you know, the issue. So Skip, I have to tell you, I can't really see the cards very well.
No, I can't see those either.
Yeah.
That was a bad deck
so,
to choose.
I do think that the value of I think, and I would say, Skip, also with this, like I do think that starting with the cards as something that is a tool for personal understanding is a better way than starting with the cards as a way to read about our country's, what's going to happen in our country. That even though what I do as a reader is tell people what's going to happen in their lives, so there's a certain amount of fortune telling involved, there's a certain amount of saying, this event or that event. And I don't just rely on the cards. In fact, for many years, I stopped using the cards and just used what I saw. But I went back to using the cards again recently just because I actually, the subtle tarot had just gotten published. So, but as a tool for personal transformation and for understanding yourself, the tarot is phenomenal. Any divination method can be phenomenal. And I think that the value of that is great.
Yeah, I might withdraw my idea here because it doesn't seem to be giving me enough space. I pulled out the Rider-Waite
I also
card.
think that, Skip, I really think that rather than going through a whole Celtic cross,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, we're talking, it would be better if, I mean, I can show a reading that I can show an image of a reading and talk some about what it says and what it means for that. But I do think that in terms of giving that there's like the people's, you know, they're just looking, for example, when you start off doing readings, first, like you can start off just picking a card a day or start off picking 3 cards. That's better than presenting yourself with a whole 10-card spread that you then have to put in relationship to each other, which I think can be
I'm gonna withdraw my idea because it's the idea of doing it on my iPhone isn't it doesn't look like it's that great.
So here, I'll show, I've got a reading here.
Could I make a couple of comments as well?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Michael, and Melissa, what an enjoyable, equally enjoyable and fascinating presentation, really enlightening. And you know, what strikes me as an analyst is, you know, the parallel between tarot reading and dream interpretation. And it's interesting because when you talk about the major arcana and the minor arcana, sometimes analysts will present dreams that Jung and we talk about as archetypal dreams. So sometimes people have dreams that are more personal and relate to their, let's say, day-to-day lives. And other times people will present dreams that relate to the greater trajectories of life. And that reminds me of what you were saying, you know, the difference between the major arcana and the minor arcana. And
yes.
You know, and also in terms of interpreting your own reading, people come to an analyst because a dream, for example, comments on your conscious attitude. It acts as a compensation. It tells you what you don't know about yourself. So the problem is, unless you're very skilled at it, if you attempt to interpret your own dream, then you're going to interpret it from the same ego attitude that the dream is commenting upon, and you'd likely get it backwards. So I imagine, you know, the same thing happens when you do a reading and you try to interpret the reading for yourself.
Right. So doing a reading for yourself is a very good way, again, to learn the cards and to start developing that dialogue with yourself as well, just like keeping a dream journal.
And to relate to the images, I imagine.
Yeah. But at a certain point, it's also like somebody else can always see things in it that you can't. And you're always going to be somewhat motivated by your own fears or hopes. This is the same thing I was just thinking. A little bit of learning is definitely a dangerous thing when it comes to palm reading, for example. I have to think, people don't know, what do the lines of my hand mean? It's like, you know, you are going to be like putting yourself down a rabbit hole. Just, you know, it's the whole big picture. But here I can show, if you, and I would say also, like, someone who without knowing enough about the full-on Jungian analysis to speak intelligently about that, both when you see anyone who is serving in that kind of role, the role of a psychologist or psychiatrist or analyst, you are with that person to talk about yourself. And I would often say that in terms of doing a reading, that I'm talking to people about the most important thing in their life, which is themselves.
Yeah.
Appropriately, the most important thing in their life.
I'd like to offer just a little bit different perspective here that might be helpful to Michael, and that is that I see the tarot as in a middle space between a conversation with a friend or a spouse, let's say, and an analyst. In other words, every day we have conversations all day long with people, and that helps us keep our mental balance. But a tarot reading comes in, and in my view, what it does is it causes us to reflect ourselves on something that's going on in our life. So a clever reader or effective reader will give a fluent reading, and some things will connect with you and some things won't. But what it does is it connects with everybody, because if Melissa or I give a reading, there are going to be some sore spots in your subconscious, in your unconscious, that are going to they're going to come to your attention. Like, the reader may say something about mother, and you've got an issue with your mother right now, okay? But in a reading with 10 cards, for example, the readings here, in a reading with 10 cards, chances are they're going to hit on one or two things that are issues that you need to reflect on in your own life. And that can be very helpful, because I call it a kind of moving the furniture around in your unconscious. Causes you to look at things a little different way. And then the next level is the analyst, who actually is going to go in there with you, in your unconscious with you, and do a detailed analysis from a mental health professional point of view. That's not what a tarot reader does. A tarot reader just says, here's some things to think about. And usually they're going to hit something that you need to think about. And so that reflecting on those things is a useful thing. At least this is my perspective after doing
Yeah, I don't know
this.
if I agree with here's some things, the whole, like, you're going to hit on a few things. I mean, yeah, that's kind of true, but also, like, it's true that you would probably hit on something for anyone, but I would agree that it's not the same as going at something from a mental health professional's point of view. But when someone is getting a reading, you are putting there's some, there's a spiritual process that's happening, which is not necessarily the case with an analysis. And you, depending upon who you get the reading with or what it's about, but there's a way in which it's also about letting your soul or some aspect of your spirit speak to you, and give you perspective. It's not just about, like, oh, here's a few things you might want to think about, and I'm sure that something's going to hit. It's not really that, I would say.
Say, Melissa, there's some questions piling up here. Can we go through a couple of
Okay.
these before you start?
Yeah. And
So-
I'll stop sharing, but this is, here's a reading here with 10 cards, and it's the same 10 cards with 2 different decks. Okay. Yes.
So Kate says, how would you comment on how to read the overall pattern, how the cards relate to each other? And is there a way to read the cards that are adjacent to each other? Does that have a meaning?
That's a good question. And I would say also that varies a lot reading to reading. And again, I would say it's very important to, the more readings you do, the more you start to get a sense of it, about, like, which of the cards are talking to each other. But here, I'll go back to the screen share. but and it does really, you should, I mean, I remember, Skip, is it okay with you if I say something about just about the adjacent cards in the reading that I did for you? Okay, is that a yes? Okay. I remember in the reading that we did for Skip, that there was a card in, let's see if I can get my cursor, a card in this position right here that and so this position is the card that has to do with the past. But the card was the Queen of Pentacles, and it was looking in the direction towards here, and it somehow seemed to relate to this. And I remember just getting a feeling that that was about his wife and about her response, like the way that she was kind of like keeping an eye on everything and like saying, you know, don't step in, watch out for that, like watch out for that pitfall there. You know, you can go ahead and step in it if you want, but you know, I would say watch out. So, but there was no reason why that should be the case, why that card should have had that relationship to all the other cards. It was just what came up in that reading about it.
Quite right. And I agree with you. It was a psychic connection between you and me during the reading, and it was bang on. So.
Yeah, so there's that quality to it. I mean, I honestly think that when you see a good analyst or a good psychiatrist or a good psychologist, that most of them are engaging some part of themselves that is also intuitive and psychic as well. I do believe that that usually happens.
Well, I'm sure that Michael will confirm that, and they're very much involved. But it does happen between a reader and the client, especially when the reader is intuitive. You pick up things that are there.
So I'll just talk a little bit about this reading in terms of the cards and their position.
So Melissa, there's
Yeah.
a comment here that says if you press play, you'll get a full screen on the share.
If I press play,
I'm not sure what that,
part of why I didn't do the full screen sharing was because I wanted to be able to move between things, but I don't see a play to press. Is it, see a pause?
maybe if you click on the screen you want, on the window that you want, and then click share, maybe that'll do it.
Well, I have two,
Yeah.
two images. I could make it bigger so that it rounds out the rest of it, but let's see.
They say the play button is at the top of the page.
At the top of the page, okay. Let's see, I see stop video, screen sharing, Q&A, new share, pause. I don't see a play. I don't see a play. So I'll talk about this a little bit, and then I'll fiddle with it and see if I can find play.
Okay.
As long as this is all right, just for now. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the cards in relationship to each other. This is a reading that I did. This was a layout that I did for a class. The class might even be on my YouTube channel. I don't remember for sure, and I don't remember if it was a reading about anything in particular. But looking at it, it would seem to be about a relationship. The reason that you would say that is because we have the two of cups right there, which is obviously, which is pretty easy to see that's about a relationship. We also have temperance up here, which is one of the three major cards that deals with relationships. We also have the devil there and the Hierophant, which often has to do with like social circumstance, social institutions like marriage, for example. So the first thing that you would do is just sort of see the relationship of the major cards, and ending with a major card that also kind of gives, if it ends with a major card, then that gives you some sense that everything else that's happening here fits into it fits into this circumstance, which if there's three major cards that really have to do with relationships. The first is the lovers, where you first see the other and recognize yourself in the other, that sort of love first connection. And then there's temperance. So love also, the lovers also has some notion of choice and some idea of passion too. Temperance is more about developing the part of the relationship that's finding the middle ground. So it's more about communication. It's also about art or yoga, but about finding that balanced place where you hold, where both retain their, where they're both individual and they're able to find the gap in between the two, that middle space that's so hard to hold actually. And then there's the sun, which is kind of like where it all comes together, the best of everything that life has to offer, including in terms of relationships. But this would seem to indicate a relationship that is, and this card, the Hierophant, would have come up reversed. So there's some issue of either like perhaps a stagnant structure or not having a kind of structure, not being married or not wanting to like call it anything in particular. That's one thing that it can mean. It can mean other things as well. But it suggests a positive relationship between like the fact of Temperance coming up upright and the Two of Cups coming up there. And then you would also see, since you show these two people and we're talking about a relationship, you would think that this would say something about either the person who's getting the reading or about the two people who are involved in the reading, who clearly also has some issues to deal with here with the devil showing up. So, and also with the Nine of Swords showing up as well, which again is not a hard card to read. It shows it's usually like a certain degree of anxiety. Okay, so that's, I mean, I could keep going with this reading, but I just wanted to give I would like to know from the person who asked the question if that, did that help her at all? Did that answer? Maybe she'll feedback. But I would say that the way that the cards, that letting the cards speak to you in the course of doing a reading and letting them, like being very open to the way that cards are influenced by their relationship with each other showing up there is really an important part of doing a reading.
Say, there's another question here, as long as that screen is up.
Oh, I'll go back to it. Okay.
I think this is really interesting. How do you work with color symbolism when the decks are different? For example, when the Rider-Waite has a Western color symbolism, but other decks depart from that sometimes. How do you cross-reference?
I mean, I think that you want to work with the I mean, it's like speaking different languages. You within any given deck, you want to work with what how that deck is working with color. So so for example, in my deck, I used for the swords, which are in the air element, which also represents thought, I used colors that for me were indicative of the air element and have a certain sort of coolness to them. Whereas for the fire element, I used colors that were warm. So again, as a painter too, you want to let the color, I think that color is an important, it resonates and it should speak on its own without necessarily having to be intellectually understood. And in any given deck, I mean, like there's some decks that are just very, very dark. But if you're just using that deck, they're all dark. So the colors that are lighter and darker speak in the context of that deck. I think trying to come up with one way to understand color would be problematic. I mean,
Good.
Tim, what do you
And
think about that? You're an artist also. Like if you're presented with images, it's like looking at a picture. The way that the image works together, the way the colors work together, say something to you, right?
well,
Wouldn't you
yeah,
agree?
I think it's kind of like the personal unconscious and the collective.
Mhm.
There are colors that have rich universal meaning, like red being passion.
Mhm.
And then there are colors that are specific to my own life that have meaning for me.
Right,
And it seems like you can have a conversation between those two different kinds of reading.
right. And I think of that in terms of my work, you know, with the Yoga Sutras also. For example, the color blue. Um, I was just hearing there was a prayer, a chant that I heard this morning that spoke of actually Nityananda, blue, deep blue like Krishna. So blue is given a certain sort of spiritual significance, a very powerful spiritual significance. And but then also think of the notion of colorless. Like, how do you show the spirit? Do you show it with blue? Do you show it with white? Do you show it? So these are, and I think the answer is yes for all of it. Like sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's white, sometimes it could even be black. You know, it's not one thing.
Okay, so Brendan is asking, why do people do readings using the Celtic cross pattern?
Oh, that's, I mean, that's a good question too. Um, I don't think you have to do readings with the Celtic cross. They do readings with the Celtic cross because that was because the tarot, you know, kind of re-entered Western culture as a divination method of, you know, just before and around the turn of the century with Arthur Waite, and he publicized the Celtic cross. So it's a reading that has a certain traction culturally. I use it because, you know, it's useful because it works, but also I sometimes just pick cards, and I went through phases of making up my own readings, which I think is also totally valid. If you decide in advance what things are going to mean and what positions are going to mean, and you come up with a meaningful way to position the cards in relationship to each other, you don't have to use the Celtic cross. It's just, it works, you know, that's why people use it.
Okay, um, we still got questions over here, so I'll just start going
Yeah.
through them. Jan says, from what I've experienced, the tarot taps into synchronicity, and as such, it's very powerful. It's not like playing with fire, but like playing with consciousness and unconsciousness. It's pretty serious, like alchemy.
Yeah, I would say she's right.
Yeah, it feels that way to me too.
Yeah, that's well put.
Okay, here's another one. How can the reader protect their psyche and emotional life from anything negative that's there in the other person for whom the card is read?
That's also a good question. But and also I would say, like, just in life, how do you protect your psyche? And I mean, just being around other people, we all take in so much more than we know all the time, from like socially and otherwise. Like right now, with everything that's happening with the pandemic, there's a certain kind of anxiety that I think is just there, or the sense of isolation that can be exacerbated by the fact that others are feeling it and then builds on each other. We all pick up a lot all the time. And when you're doing readings for others, you know, there's certain sort of specific techniques to use, whether it's like grounding yourself first, surrounding yourself with white light, um, uh, clearing the field both before and after. These are all useful things to do. There's a Hawaiian uh, what not tradition that I was once told of cutting the cords. Joss, are you familiar with that at all? It's an amazing. The idea is that with every person that you meet and have any interchange with at all in the course of a day, you create a cord, and at the end of every day, you need to cut all the cords, including the cord to like those who you live with, the people close to you, but that at the end of every day, you cut those cords to, and you imagine this is something that you do in your mind, to clear your own field of what belongs to others. I think that what I really feel, though, in terms of doing readings, is that it is impossible to do a reading for anyone and not love them. It really is. You cannot enter another person's life and reality without feeling huge compassion and huge love for how much we all try. We all want to live a good life. We all want to be good people. We all want to feel safe and happy and feel like we're doing good for other people. No one, even people who do bad things, people don't, I mean, I have not ever read for someone that, like, I've read for people who have real issues and who are, you know, somewhat, some serious issues, and it does feel different. But the vast majority of us really everyone wants to be good and to live a good life and do good for others. And so as far as protecting yourself from other people, I don't generally think that, for the most part, that is a significant issue. Because
you do
it's
have
really
to
love.
take a serious position when you're doing tarot readings for other people, or any divination for that matter. I mean, I remember reading in James Michener's biography. He was known for going to county fairs and doing divination of some sort. It might have been tarot. I don't remember what his divination he was doing, but one fine day he did a divination for a young man who got very upset in the midst of the divination, not directly because of what Michener had said, but something got set off in his own psyche, and he went out and had a car accident and was killed in within the next hour. And so you know, like anything, you have to take it with a certain amount of seriousness. And I think your position about feeling love for a person is the right way to go, because
I have I mean, in the course of doing I mean, again, I've been doing professional readings for, I mean, how many years now? And there's another question I see come up from Manish that I want to answer too as well. But so I can't say the exact names, but at different times. So at a certain point, at the early days of the internet, I did a show that was very popular, that it was a joint venture between New Line and AOL. And I was in a virtual auditorium that at the time got like 12,000 people a night. It was called Tarot to Go. That was really popular. That, like, then I was in the news. I had a lot of, for a while, I was very much in the public eye as an astrologer and psychic and reader. And in New York, I would be on News 1 on New Year's Eve, like making predictions about the year. I had a very effective way with astrology that I didn't make up, of predicting events. So like contests. So that would be like sporting events, or I predicted the Bush-Gore the election, that it wouldn't be called, and when it would be called, and what would happen. So for a while, then I was also, you know, interviewed and public, and I did a reading at a certain point. I was asked to do a reading for a very famous celebrity, and that person then some months later, someone says, oh, you know, this person is on the cover of Vanity Fair and they're talking about you. They talk about you, and they talk about a reading that they had at their party that they had me come to, and that the person that so I for months before this reading, I had seen myself holding this person's hands. And so then when I first met her prior to doing it, I told her that, but I hadn't I hadn't liked the feeling, so I hadn't wanted to hold her hand. So I tried to convince her to get a tarot reading, but she wanted me to hold her hands, of course. So at the party before it got started, I did a palm reading for her and talked about what I saw happening. And and then when then looking at this article in Vanity Fair and reading what she had said about what I said, it's like, you have to understand that people are always going to hear the worst things that you say most strongly, and they're going to hear it like their own way. Like I remember reading it and thinking, like, how immature can you be to like take the thing that I said and then, you know, go here. So I was with my boyfriend at the time when I was doing it, and he said, what are you saying? And I was like muttering to myself as we drove away. I said, from now on, I'm going to say, your troubles are going to melt like snow on a summer day. You know, it's like, as a reader, there is a skill to learning how to give people news. And it is important to learn those skills. I would have to say that in this particular Vanity Fair situation, it was not so much an issue of my skill, but you have to understand, you have to pay attention to how people are hearing what you say. And you have to understand that people are going to always be afraid that their worst fears are going to happen. And you have to really pay attention that you are not speaking to their worst fears. It is a very, as to the earlier question, how do you know a good reader or something like that? Someone who's done more readings, it's like your best friend, it's going to be fine. You're going to be able to talk about it and all that. But to really look at your life, you want to talk to somebody who is going to help you with what comes up and is going to be able to pay attention to it and be attuned to to helping you work with it, helping you see what's of value and let go of the stuff that's not of value, and, you know, and read it in the context of what was going to be helpful to you. I see also there was somebody asked me, Manish asked a question. I've sometimes heard that one should not have a reading for oneself more than once a day. Is that just hearsay, or is there any truth to this? I would say, you know, there's no one rule. Generally speaking, if you do multiple readings for yourself, time after time after time in the course of a day, you're going to start getting nonsense. It's going to start going, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's just what's going to happen. In the I Ching, there's what's it called? Youthful folly. Like if you ask the question too many times, you'll get that hexagram where it's like, you know, shut up and listen. Stop asking questions and pay attention to the answer.
Melissa, do you sometimes get people who are like dependent on readings? They, you know,
I charge enough so that it's difficult for people to be overly dependent.
Okay, very good.
No, I mean, I'm sort of teasing, but yes, there are some people, more when I was younger, that happened. I've had clients who were very, very dependent, and because I had felt, and now I think I'm better at dealing with that than I was when I first started out.
So here's a comment from Carmel. She says, greetings, good to be able to join you all here. Melissa, thank you for a very insightful discussion. I'm wondering why the tarot might only be used for personal readings and not a reading of the collective, e.g. of Turtle Island in the US.
Oh, it can be. It totally can be. And I had another reading up here that was a reading done for the US. And also Skip joined, I was doing a class online for a while, and Skip joined for a while, and that was, most people were more focused on personal readings, and it was really fun to focus on bigger readings for social issues. I think it's totally valid and appropriate to do that. It's a different thing. I think there's no reason why it can't be done. There's no reason why it can't be done. I think that for many people, it is very useful to learn to use the tarot first for yourself. And so the other thing is that when you do a reading for a social issue or for a social situation, you kind of have to be sure to get your personal stuff out of the way first, because otherwise that's what's going to come up.
All right, and I want to turn to Adam. He's been waiting to give you a question.
Okay. Where's Adam?
Now that he's moved to a
Hi.
presentable
Hi.
location.
Yes, thanks. I had to get the light. I was just going to ask, you mentioned, well, first of all, thank you. And you mentioned that sometimes you use accessories, sometimes you don't. And I was, if you don't mind answering, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but how would you describe the kind of perception that you have, which could be called psychic? Do you feel it as like a sensation? Is it you know, what are the components? I mean, if you don't mind talking about
That is a great question, actually. So I did not grow up in a family that, like I said, I grew up in I don't think I don't even know if I heard the word psychic. And if you had told me when I graduated from Brown University, Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude, that I was going to be a psychic, like I would have backed away from you slowly. I would have like really, you would be a person to like not, you know, not pay any attention to, but, or to pay very careful attention to. But I had a series of events that happened in my 20s that of course had to do with disastrous love affairs, in which I had seen what was going to happen in advance and refused to believe it, and then stopped being able to see things. And I didn't really realize how much I relied on being able to see things, because I had never really acknowledged that until I stopped being able to see things and stopped being able to meditate. So then when the relationship in question ended disastrously, just exactly as had come up for me was going to happen, I realized that I should actually pay attention to the things that I saw, that it was a good thing and a helpful thing and worth paying attention to. And then that was what I called sort of like my epiphany experience, where it was like, suddenly it was really like the gates were open, and I felt very aware of non-corporeal beings who were guiding me and helping me and teaching me how to use my psychic ability and the very many different ways that it could show up. It can show up through any of the senses, and people are different. Some people feel things, some people smell things, some people see things. I use the word see because I am primarily a visual person, and I do really, I often see things. To say that I see things, it's like, when I do remote readings, I don't use the screen because I find the screen distracting, but the telephone is fine. But if I'm seeing someone in person, I can go back and forth between closing my eyes and opening them. Like the seeing is both visual and not exactly visual. For me, that's often, that is the way that I end up being most familiar with it. But it can happen through any of the senses. It can happen, there's no one way. And it's really, there are forces that exist within our world that want to help us make the connection, to bridge the gap, to be able to connect. And it's really worth it to find the way that that happens for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we finally, one more question. I thought that was the end. Is there a way to get past this point of not being able to see?
Oh, is there a way to get past this point of not being able to see, like the point where I stopped seeing things? There is, yes. I mean, so a lot of, so I stopped being able to see things because I wasn't paying attention. And this, I mean, I was refusing to pay attention. There's literally, I sat down and meditated on this great relationship that I was sure was the relationship of my life 3 times in a row. This speaks to Manisha's question about doing readings like multiple times. I wasn't doing readings. I was doing a meditation technique, and I refused to believe the images that I saw. And then the last time I sat down, like right after each other, like with the arrogance that only youth can have. That's not right. I'm going to do it again 3 times. So stupid. The last time the images cleared and I saw myself walking towards walking through a grassy plain towards a hill and up the hill, and a man was coming down the hill, and he put his arms, crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head at me like, "You idiot, I leave you to your own devices." Like that's what I saw. And you could think that was the animus, or you could think that was like my guru, you could think whatever it was. Like after that, I wasn't able to see things until the relationship ended. I recognized that I had been told in advance that this would happen, and I had refused to pay attention. And then it was, like I said, the gates opened and I was open. You have to, the most important thing is to be willing to see. That's the most important thing. And willing to pay attention. If you're in a position where you have stopped, I would recommend baby steps. Baby steps are just ask a simple question, a small question. What can I hear? What do I need to hear? Why can't I hear? But there's always a way in. And if there's not a way in, then it's because, like I said, in my circumstances, then I had to go through something to get there. But does that answer the question?
That sounded pretty good to me.
Okay.
We've exhausted the questions, so can carry on with your reading. I don't know how much time we want to take, Skip.
It's up to Melissa, but I have a couple of other sort of appendages of ideas here. I think that Melissa is a very visual person. And so when Melissa talks about her experiences, it comes out in visions per se, but I think a lot of people can also be either auditory or they can be kinesthetic.
Totally, absolutely. I agree, 100%.
Right. And so, for example, for me, I tend to be much more kinesthetic. So if you watch me on any of these screens or any of these colloquia that we do, you'll always see me looking down and to the right. That's a sure sign that I'm a kinesthetic. And so for me, I just feel the right answer when I'm doing a reading. I don't see it and I don't hear it, although I tend to be secondarily auditory and least visual, but I just know what to say, and it's not, and often it comes out also profound for people for different reasons. But I think it depends on the person and the interaction, because there's an intuitive connection between the person that you're reading for and you. And, you know, one very good use for the cards is simply to get a deck and just lay out a reading for yourself and then work through the book to see what the meanings of those cards are. And, you know, that can be a very useful way of starting to get to know yourself.
Yeah, it can be difficult. I would agree with you. And I think that doing readings for yourself is a great way to start to develop that communication between yourself and that other part of yourself, which also answers the question of what you do when you're not seeing or hearing or whatever. That's where something like the tarot or any divination method can be extraordinarily helpful for developing that communication. I would say that sometimes, much the same way, so you can learn astrology by getting your chart done and looking up the meaning of the planets and the planets and the signs and the planets and the signs and the houses. But it is actually very difficult to get a sense of what it means altogether, because the big picture means more than the little parts. So that's the only difficulty with starting off with doing a reading before you know the tarot. Like, you lay out those 10 cards and you look up each one, and one of them says you're really happy and the other one says you're so unhappy. Like, which one is it? You know, it's so that's where learning, like the taking the baby steps, picking one card to tell you something, picking 3 cards to tell you something, picking a card for past, present, and future, and then building up to doing a layout can be helpful, because you start to develop the understanding of what the cards mean and how they can relate to each other, which is not this to say that that's the only way to do it either. But but just as with astrology, the relationship of all of the planets together is, generally speaking, more important than any one planet in any one place, unless that planet is placed in a place where it's really important in terms of all the others. In the same way, doing a reading, when you do a full layout, it is the whole picture of what is said that is more important than any one card.
Right. We've been talking about this in connection with the divination, but you and I have talked about the idea that the tarot can also provide a kind of roadmap for life, because from a Jungian point of view, the major arcana represent major archetypal people and events that occur to us in our lifetime. And for this reason, I'm planning to do a 1-year teaching on the tarot as a roadmap for life, not from a divination point of view, because I too have done I already did 18 videos on divination, but
right. And that's what we talked about. Also, the hero's journey through the major arcana that's up on my YouTube channel is kind of like a beginner's guide to that. I mean, it's a quicker view of that. I think that working with the tarot in that way is very helpful. Mm-hmm. That looking at it as like the archetypes, and to help guide you through the archetypal experiences that you're going through in your life, and to help understand it better in context is really valuable. And I mean, I think properly understood, divination is not any different than that. Properly mm-hmm. understood, divination is not really about what's going to happen. It's about what is happening, and what is happening on all the different levels that things can be happening. I remember saying, like, in terms of seeing the future, it's hard enough to see the present, which is standing right there in front of you naked.
Right,
you know?
Right.
If you can see the present, if you can truly see the present, the future's right there with it.
Sure.
And the past. So that is this divination, you know, comes from the divine. You are looking at what the divine has to say about life. And life itself is one thing. You think your life is something that's all yours, but it's all just life going on at the same time. And doing a divination method is connecting to some sort of divine view of life from the particular locus of you. And that's what you want.
Yeah, and that's why I like the connection back to your Patanjali work too, because you know, the major problem that I see for young people today, especially young men, is they're faced with chaos when they're first born, because we are facing more information than we can possibly deal with right now. And as you correctly pointed out in the first painting from your Patanjali series, that we have to be able to step out of chaos and step back from it. And so the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are one way of doing that, which is an Eastern meditation approach. And what came to me by that interaction with you was that that's really what the Tarot is too, but it's really what the Stations of the Cross are in Catholicism. And so every spiritual tradition has a series of steps that we face in our lifetime. And the interesting thing about the Tarot is you take 78 possible cards and you put them in whatever number of positions you want, but let's say it's 10. So you have 78 cards times 2 if you use reversed. And now you've got 156, and now you have 10 different positions that 156 can go to. So you're at 1,560 possible things. And what I see in terms of being a reader in a divination, I think of that as there's a story to be told here, and there's 1,560 possible things in a Celtic cross that you might say about that story. And they're pretty much the things that come up in everybody's life, actually. And
right, I would say the only thing I would say is like each of the Tarot cards is like a file cabinet. So it's not like the accounting that you give for how many different things can be said is much, much greater than that, because each one holds a number of possibilities, and especially the minor arcana even more, the major arcana even more. They're like a file cabinet holding a whole series of a lot of different things that each card can mean.
That's why on the Monday night series that I'm going to run, we're only going to use one card a week,
right,
at least for the first 22 weeks, because we can, I'm sure we can fill 2 hours talking about each archetype.
No doubt, no doubt. And especially if people are also talking about what comes up for them for each archetype too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that the way that the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, the kind of roadmap presented by the Yoga Sutras is different from the kind of roadmap that something like the Tarot can give, and even also different from something like the roadmap that the Bhagavad Gita gives.
Sure.
And the Tarot has, the advantage of being a tool that, as you correctly say, can tell a story that's personal to you.
Right. Whereas
those other two are telling a more universal story that you can then put your own experience on top of.
Right. The interesting thing that came up from Kushbu, who I'm reading the Gita with, is that the Gita is really, the whole Gita is really the archetype of the humble warrior. So you can think of it as the hero's journey. And I've begun to think of the hero's journey as really the first half of life journey. You have to find some meaning in your life, but you have to learn how to be a human being and how it all fits together first. And that's what you do in the first half of life. And now you figure out what you do with it. And that's where many people get into trouble, including me, more than once. And so but anyway, many young people, it seems to me, need some sort of guidance on the hero's journey, and which is basically what the Fool is here.
Yeah,
okay,
I would agree.
So here's the Fool's Pilgrimage by Stephen Heller.
Yeah, there's a lot of good books, a lot of good writing about that. And I also think it's interesting that the Fool is labeled card 0. So sometimes you'll see people argue about where the Fool belongs in the deck. I like thinking about the Fool as the wild card. It can show up anywhere. And in this, there's another correlation with the Yoga Sutras. The Sutra 46 in book 1 says, you're paraphrasing, well, no, not paraphrasing. It says, up to this point, all of these levels of samadhi, of the experience of absorption in the self, or transcendent absorption, or meditative absorption, all of them are with seed, meaning that at any point you can like go back to square one until there is something else that happens at a certain point where those seeds are burned and you're beyond that point. But in the same way, the Fool at any point can take you back to square one. And there's also something positive in that gets back to Tim's original, I'm going to be the one asking the stupid questions. It's like that beginner's mind is always important to have.
Sure. And what we're talking about here for new people who haven't seen Melissa before, is that about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we had Melissa previously, in which she was talking about her now 2-volume series on the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. And she's done a painting for each of the verses of the Yoga Sutra. And it's very, very interesting. And so I would urge anybody that's watching this that isn't aware of that to go back and listen to that previous appearance by Melissa a few weeks ago. Yep, there's volume 1.
And here I've got book 2 too, right here.
And these
I'm working on book 3 right now. So the paintings are book 3.
The two, basically there's 195 verses of the Patanjali, and Melissa's completed the first half of it in paintings, which is a very valuable and awesome approach from my point of view. So much so that when I bought my first set, and then I was trying to get my wife to look at it, and she wouldn't look at it. And then the last time in the afternoon, I said, you're going to have to come to this session with Melissa. And so here, look at this book. And she looked at it. And the next morning, she told me that after she'd heard Melissa, she ordered her own set. And she doesn't trust me to make it available to her. So she's ordered her own book. So that's also a very good series by Melissa, and I urge everyone to go back and take a look at that session that we had a few weeks ago. Anything else we should?
The one other comment that occurred to me that I meant to make that I didn't is that I do think, especially given that the thing that brings this group together is the work of Jung. The Tarot kind of re-entered Western culture with people like Arthur Waite and the group of esoteric, there's occultists in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But Jung's work with the Tarot and with divination methods is so important in terms of how it has changed how it's guided people's understanding of things like the Tarot. I mean, or any divination method. I mean, I think that occurred to me at one point when someone was talking that it can't be overstated how much Jung's work, how important it is in terms of understanding the things like divination method, in terms of having a deeper understanding of the possibilities of something like divination methods in our culture.
Yeah, Jung understood how the mind actually works, not statistical science type of working where you say, well, if it's a woman and she's 45, chances are she's depressed. 95% of the time she's depressed. Let's give her a pill. And that's the other way of doing it. But Dr. Jung understood that this is really how the psyche works. And we do see the world through images. All of our thinking is through images. And if we understand that, then we're a long way along the road to understanding ourselves. Did I say anything wrong, Michael? Michael Marsman is a Jungian analyst, so I must ask him if I have misstated here.
Absolutely not. No, that, I was thinking, oh, I should make a comment. And then I thought, no, I don't need to. You're expressing that point of view so finely. But I did actually have a book recommendation if anybody's interested.
Terrific. We'll take it.
Marie-Louise von Franz.
Oh, yeah.
Who was Jung's protege. She met Jung when she was 18, and she's brilliant, genius. Writes books on divination and synchronicity. And so she has, I think, a book called On Divination. There was the other contribution that I think, and I'll be brief, people have mentioned synchronicity. And Melissa, when you were talking about how tarot works, you were heading in that direction. Mm-hmm. And what briefly synchronicity is that rather than, in the West, we have a causal orientation, that this happens and then that happens and that happens. And the concept of synchronicity is that things arise out of a moment in time. And so that when you use tarot or when you use the I Ching or any of these methods, that it's not even necessarily that your psyche interacts with the card, but that in the same thing with astrology, but there's something about the moment of time that gives birth to a psychic and physical occurrence. So it's almost like there would be a root, like a rhizome, where the psychic event pops up here and the physical event pops up here at the same time, and they're actually connected. And so that's how we look at the synchronicity and the relation between psyche and tarot.
Makes sense.
Well, so thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking about it. I love talking about the tarot. It's definitely
right.
And yeah, good. And I would.
So I will put links to Melissa's website in the description for this video on YouTube. I might not get that done before tomorrow, but
my website has links to my YouTube channel too, where, like I said, I have a lot of really good videos up about the tarot with no ads.
Could you just put your website name into the chat, and then I'll put it over on the YouTube chat.
It's
if you don't mind.
Townsend.com. And on YouTube, if you put Melissa Townsend tarot,
I put the link in the chat earlier.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think the channel name is Melissa A. Townsend, but.
Okay, I'm going to be putting that over.
Yeah, and I wish everybody to enjoy the exploration with something like the tarot. I think it's a really valuable thing.
Well, you've certainly pushed me along because you were doing tarot also, and I've loved the tarot for 25 years, but I've gone hot and cold on it over the years. But one of the things that I love about it is the art that's in it, and the different art pieces that are. So besides your deck, I think I bought about 8 or 10 other decks to prepare me. So I have the Cosmic Tarot and the Secret Tarot and the Visconti Tarot, all
Oh, I
kinds
love,
of,
yeah, the Visconti Tarot is beautiful.
and the Spirit Song Tarot, and there's a couple of
There's
others.
many great decks out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a fascinating topic. I'm
Mhm.
sure we'll be covering it again, and we'll
And
have to.
Melissa, there's tons of people just praising you like crazy in the
Oh, how wonderful.
so I think this has been really, really fruitful, and thank you so much for doing this. It's
My
really,
pleasure. My
Yeah.
pleasure.
great.
All right.
All right,
Thanks
peace.
so much.
And
See you later.
everybody, don't forget Melissa's 2 decks, the Subtle Tarot by Melissa Townsend and the
I call that one the
Elteds.
Elteds Tarot, but I think it's called the Melissa Townsend Tarot officially.
Yeah.
And, they're available at different places, but you can always contact me and I'll tell you how to get one or sell you one.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Thank you. We'll see you again. Everybody remember tomorrow at 1 p.m. we have Murray Stein, who's going to, among other things, tell us how his life changed when he ran into BTS, which is the Korean boy band that is so popular around the world. And he wrote a book about 25 years ago that didn't sell many copies probably, but after the producer for BTS found his book and persuaded the boys to do 2 albums based on his book. His life has really changed, and we have over 500 people registered for tomorrow's session. So it's going to be it's not going to be quite as intimate as the session with Melissa tonight. So thank you, Melissa, for being here today, and I look
My
forward to
pleasure.
seeing you again.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.